architect, building designer, or draftsperson? What's the difference? Is there a difference? And how to decide which is the best choice for your project. Look, Google this and you'll see it's a question many aspiring home renovators ask. And just like so many other things home renovation related, there is really no easy answer, no obvious right or wrong choice. Your needs, your project type, your budget, and many other factors all play an important role in this really important decision. If you're watching this video, you're probably trying to work out whether or not it's even worth spending the money on an architect, or if you only need the services of a draftsperson. Or you might even be scratching your head as to what the difference is between the professions, or if there even is one. If that's you, then you're in the right place, as that's what I'm talking about today, whether an architect, building designer, or draftsman is required and what's the difference. Hi, I'm Sarah and I'm the founder of the Zen Reno, and I help homeowners confidently start, navigate and nail their home renovation or new build project and have a fun and really exciting experience getting a home they love living in and are proud to show off. So how do you decide which is the right design professional for you and for your project? Firstly, you'll want to have a good idea of how important the design of your home that is to you. Think about your project and what you actually want to do. Is it a major renovation or just a smaller makeover? How big or small or even complex is your project? And how much money can you or are you prepared to commit to the design process? People often shy away from the cost of design, worrying that it might not be money well spent, or money spent on design services will reduce your build budget and you might miss out on other things down the track. But keep in mind, just because an architect costs more doesn't mean that there's never a need to engage one. If you value looks and function and efficient use of space maybe, energy efficiency, or even want a bespoke or unique outcome, or your project is complex and challenging, then it could very well be worth your while to invest more resources at the design phase of your project by hiring an architect or a building designer. At the end of the day, don't overlook the fact that the drool-worthy homes you are saving or pinning in Instagram and Pinterest are not designed by draftspeople. They are designed by architects or even building designers. And if wowing the neighbours is more important than your bottom line, then the choice is simple: an architect or a skilled building designer all the way. But if you're happy with a slightly modified, more modern version of a cookie cutter design that you've seen somewhere, or your project is simple and fairly straightforward, then it's probably not an option for you to shell out for custom design services when a draftsperson is more than capable of completing the task at hand. When it comes to designing your dream home, architects, building designers, or even draftspeople can all perform that role to varying degrees. So, in order to help you make an educated decision, remember, we at the Zen Reno are all about helping you make informed decisions for your project and encouraging you not to base said decisions on hearsay or assumptions about whom you should work with to design your dream home. Because one thing you can take to the bank when you start this process is that every man and his dog will have an opinion and advice and will be more than happy to give it to you. The first thing to be aware of is that there actually is in fact a difference, big one, between these three professions. On the surface and to the inexperienced, they can seem almost interchangeable, and many homeowners base their decisions around which is best almost solely on cost, mainly because they don't understand or value the differences, which in my opinion is pretty much the same thing. The most significant difference lies in their levels of expertise and training. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look at each. But quickly before we do, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification next to it. That way you'll be amongst the first to know when our videos drop every single week. So let's start at the top, as they say. What does an architect actually do? An architect is a licensed design professional with extensive education, training and licensing. They are legally responsible for all the work they perform. Typically, architects are highly skilled in design and problem solving, and this is the primary difference between the professions, especially between architects and draftsmen, and to some extent building designers. And this is their expertise and training in design. All Australian architects must be registered with the Architects Accreditation Council of Australia. So in order to lawfully call yourself an architect or to offer architectural services to the public, you must be registered. To qualify for this accreditation, an architect must have completed 5 years at university, followed by 2 years working in an architectural practice, then pass an oral and written registration exam and undertake ongoing education. So all in all, architects require a high level of training from the get-go. So what does a building designer do? A building designer's skills can often closely align with those of an architect. They can effectively carry out the same tasks as an architect, as in project delivery, documentation and design, and can often do it in a fairly cost-effective way. Typically though, building designers tend to come from a range of different backgrounds. Many building designers start their careers as a draftsperson and then later acquire the necessary licenses to operate as a building designer. An interesting fact is that even after gaining an architectural degree, a person is still legally considered a building designer until they take the required licensing exam. And that means that you may be able to find a building designer with all the education of an architect who simply hasn't gotten certified yet. It's important to be aware also that in many parts of Australia, anyone can operate as a building designer. And by this, I mean they don't need any qualifications or credentials whatsoever to hang out a shingle and charge fees to design homes. In these states, there is no registration or licensing requirements for building designers. While anyone can operate as a building designer in these places, it's crucial to remember that ultimately their work needs to still fully comply with any building and planning regulations, or it simply will not be allowed to be built. For that reason, you need to choose carefully in these states and territories. It's a different story, however, in Victoria, Queensland and Tasmania, where there are stricter controls, and as a result, you have greater levels of protection. In these states, building designers still have to be certified to work on certain types of buildings, and they must individually qualify to work on residential homes. This gives them an extra layer of accountability and therefore credibility. And insurances and all the necessary technical skills and qualifications, which is typically an advanced diploma in building design, are required in order to qualify for any of these accreditations, registrations or licenses. The best place to start your search is to look for building designers who are members of the relevant professional associations, because those who belong to these associations are likely to be doing ongoing continuing professional development or CPD, which means in theory that they'll be up with the latest changes in local planning laws and similar issues affecting their work. And that leaves us with a draftsperson. So, what does a draftsperson do? A draftsperson is an expert in drawing up house plans. They focus purely on the documentation and the delivery of the plans. An analogy to explain the difference between an architect or building designer and a draftsperson is to understand the difference between drawing and design, is to compare it to writing a book. An architect is the author and the creator who comes up with the plot, and a draftsperson is the printer who types out the story and puts it into a physical form for others to read. They have no real input into the plot whatsoever. Draftspeople typically don't have any design education or experience, but they are usually highly skilled in using computer-aided design and drafting software, which is commonly referred to as CAD, to create the architectural drawings for construction. Look, some draftspeople will have formal education and some won't. They may have obtained certificates or diplomas or degrees in drafting, but they generally won't have design training, and nor will they typically have experience in local council planning codes, and their exposure to design is usually by way of converting design drawings to construction documents on the computer. Note also that currently only Victoria and Queensland require drafters to be licensed. So in those states, make sure they have the relevant class of registration to produce drawings for the construction of domestic buildings. Look, like with a building designer, it's also worth checking to see if your drafter is a member of an industry association, as a result, they're more likely to keep up to date with developments in their sector. I'll pop some links to relevant licensing bodies and associations for all three professions in the show notes. Right, so now that we've talked a bit about what they all do, let's look at the role each profession plays in the design process. A building designer will typically handle the design and the documentation of the building to the approval stage, and then in most cases hand the plans over to the builder and step away. For this reason, they focus on producing detailed, high-quality plans that can be interpreted mostly without their involvement, and are therefore best suited to projects with relatively standard construction elements. An architect, on the other hand, oversees the design, the documentation, and the delivery of a project, all the way through to the construction phase and completion if that's what you want them to do, because you don't have to engage them for the entirety of your project. They can act as an independent administrator of the building contract during the construction of a project. Since they have complete oversight of the design as it's being built, they can incorporate more complex or non-standard design elements and building techniques into a project. The construction phase is usually the longest and the most difficult and also the most stressful part of the process. So expert handling by an architect can be a really key feature to a project's success if it's a more complex one. And something else to keep in mind, in Australia, unlike many countries around the world, we aren't required to the use of a design professional when you design a home. You can in fact design your home yourself. But to acquire the relevant building approvals you need to have a certain level of drawing and documentation, and that will typically require the use of a draftsperson skill as an absolute minimum. And regardless of who you choose, it's crucial to remember that ultimately the work needs to fully comply with any and all of the building and planning regulations and are required to be certified by a certified building surveyor. And for that reason alone, it's really important to select the right professional for your project. Now you have a better understanding of what each does and their role in the design process, which one should you choose? Or should I phrase it, which one is best for your project? An architect might be the best choice for you if your project is larger in scale or quite complex in nature, or if you have a difficult site that requires an innovative design solution. An architect might be best for you if your design needs to be created from scratch or you're open to exploring alternate options. An architect might be best for you if there are complex or non-standard building techniques and custom-made elements that will require more detailed documentation and supervision. And they might be best for you if you have a healthy budget and you want to invest in a professional who can oversee the whole process from design through to managing the project during construction to completion. What about a building designer? A building designer might be best if the project is of a relatively small scale and not overly complex. You have a clearly defined concept that needs professional execution to get the plans through approval. A building designer might be best if your project can be built using the more common construction techniques and does not require extensive detailed documentation and supervision during construction. And also if you're willing to oversee the construction phase yourself in order to respect maybe your budget constraints. A draftsperson, on the other hand, might be best for you if your project is relatively small, like a quick makeover renovation. A draftsperson might be great if you have little to no design input required and you potentially have a design concept that needs to be only professionally drawn up. So, who are you thinking about choosing? Pop your first choice in the comments below. I'm always interested in the choices people make and why. Another thing to keep in mind is the cost difference. Cost is always a big issue in these things. Remember, this is the primary reason for most homeowners' choice, but it's not as simple as it first may seem. There is little doubt that there is a cost difference between each of these professions, and there's no doubt it can be a really significant one. And mostly that comes down to the level of qualification and licensing, and also to the scope of services that they offer. Look, there's a perception amongst would-be renovators that an architect is always going to be the most expensive option, whereas in truth, many architects can and do prepare well thought out cost-effective solutions to a specific design problem. And a high quality experienced building designer can often charge a comparable fee to an architect. The most important thing that needs to be taken into consideration is this. Make sure that the designer, whichever you choose, gives you a clear scope of work, laid out in your fee agreement so that you know exactly what you are getting, what to expect, and what you're paying for. Remember that you're paying for the expertise, not just the hours that they work. A more experienced or better qualified professional can often be a really worthwhile investment in your future home and lifestyle. More time spent on the process doesn't always equate to a better outcome. And if you're working with the right professional, it's possible to get a good quality outcome in a really timely manner. Okay, so we've established that an architect are experts in home design. But does that mean that an architect equates to a better design? Look, depending on the challenges of your project, the difference between hiring a building designer and an architect won't necessarily be reflected in the quality of the end design. You might assume that using an architect will guarantee a better design, given the extra level of qualification required by an architect, whereas in reality, either an architect or a building designer for that matter has the ability to produce a thoughtful, well-executed design and can provide you with a really great outcome. At the end of the day, the success of your project will often come down to the talent of the individual you hire and whether or not they're well matched to the scope and type of your project, which is why we always recommend that you spend the time choosing the right designer for your specific project. In fact, check out episode 2 where we actually talk about this very topic. Remember, there were no right or wrong choices here. Like so many things when renovating and building your home, it comes down to knowing what you want to achieve, what is important to you, and what your budget is, and making choices accordingly. And by having a good understanding of the differences between these three professions, you'll be in a position to make a great choice for your project. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss future episodes. And feel free to let us know how we're doing. We're always listening. If you've got any topic ideas you'd like us to delve into, drop us a line. I'll pop up some contact details in the show notes. The Zen Reno channel was created to share useful tips with renovating your home. And our aim is to help you navigate your dream home journey. So join us each week as we pull all our knowledge and expertise out of our brain, because we want you to succeed almost as much as you do. Until next week.